So I guess we've been building up a nice narrative throughout the day around people as one of our key risks, actually, when it comes to cybersecurity. So during his keynote, Dr. Lynch highlighted that actually cybersecurity is not just an IT issue, and actually it's a balance of technology and people in order to address this area properly. And we've heard a lot of talk about this digital revolution that's changing the way that we work and live, and also presents a lot of new risks, but also a lot of new opportunities as businesses. And we've heard about people as potentially being our biggest vulnerability, but also people as our last line of defense. So we had the minister talking about how a majority of breaches can be attributed to human error, whether that's malicious or accidental. And then we had Troels Orting from Barclays talking about the human firewall and people as part of our strategy. We've heard quite a bit of talk about social engineering. So Steve Williamson from GSK talked about how people generally want to do the right thing, but maybe it's not always at the forefront of our mind. So in this panel, what we intend to address is how do we change behaviors to make our organizations more secure. So on the panel today, we have, starting furthest from me, Silas Bartlett, who's the head of Security Solutions Delivery at Royal Bank of Scotland Group. We have Christopher Ravinas, who's the head of IT Finance for Tullow Oil, closest to me. And then we have Dr. Tobias Viken, who's the Director of National Security Programs for the International Cyber Policy Centre, which sits within the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So I think we have some quite good perspectives, one from financial services, one from oil and gas, and one from more of a public policy perspective. So just to open, my first question is for Silas. So I guess, what would you identify as the most significant vulnerability for cybersecurity when it comes to people?
That's a good question. Thanks, Patrick. I mean, certainly in financial services, I think if we look at, when we're looking at vulnerabilities in terms of people, we both look at our staff clearly, and we also look at our customers. And if just taking our staff in the first instance, in the financial services, quite fast-paced environment, people often react quite quickly to commands from above, and so we need to, a lot of the messages that we give to our staff is, continue to work for the customer, do the right thing, all this type of thing, and then suddenly, therefore, if they get a phishing email or something along those lines, they're quite an easy target unless awareness is raised, because they want to react quickly, they want to help. It may have come from someone senior in the bank, and they want to react to that. So they get the message about helping people sort of throughout their corporate life, and then we then have to raise the awareness to say, actually, you need to be careful in this space. You need to moderate what you're doing, etc. So it's about educating them and just slightly changing the culture that they're getting in other parts of the bank. Yeah. And then in terms of customers, again, it's just an awareness piece, and actually making it easier for them to do things. So we have a very tiered approach to products, etc., so that it's easy for them to get into a product, but then equally, as you're asking them to do more complex things or more sensitive things, you then ramp up the level of security that you require them to do.
Brilliant. So I guess my next question is for Chris, which is, what strategy have you found most effective for actually changing behavior and embedding security culture?
Yeah, thanks. I think for us, we work globally. We've got most of our operations in Africa, and so there's quite a juxtaposition between the national cultures of the corporate headquarters in London and a little bit Dublin-centric, and then where a lot of the operations are in Africa. And I think one of the things that we've done is done a deeper dive into the differences of the national cultures, and tried to look at how we could quantify and measure reactions to corporate governance coming from one culture and how that's playing and resonating in operation centers that are predominantly of a different culture. And then based on that analysis, start to work with both the awareness content around that governance, but then also the governance itself to try to make sure you've got culturally tailored efforts to compel compliance effectively. So we've seen double-digit gains, for instance, in our phishing exercises in terms of resilience or resistance against social engineering through using those types of culturally tailored tactics. And there's enough information out there. I think culture is this sort of nebulous concept that we throw around a lot, and everybody's aware of sort of the organizational layer of culture, but there's a national layer of culture, an ethnic layer of culture that actually really drives the relationship between an individual and then their interaction with governance. And that's a whole arena which is rife for examination to increase compliance.
Okay. And so I guess my next question for Tobias, on this theme of culture, whether it's organizational or whether it's geographic, how have you seen that affect the advice that you provide on effective public policy for this area?
Sure. So a lot of our work is taking a scan of the Asia Pacific and trying to understand how different countries are absorbing different governance structures for cybersecurity, how different business sectors are organising themselves around the region. And certainly something that's reflected in the diplomatic discussion is a constant discussion around the differences in culture, language, and how different countries approach this issue. So certainly something that we see is big cultural differences in behavioural change in parts of Southeast Asia than they would be within the UK, for example. So that would demand slightly different approaches to behavioural change. But it also is reflective, I think, it's certainly in that region of the degree of variability in maturity of the technological sector too. So in a country like Indonesia, if you were trying to implement behavioural change, you do that against the backdrop of around 81% of all software being pirated. So it's got to be an approach which is hand in hand, both at the same time. And I think a lot of companies here in this room will be carrying risks globally, not just here in the UK. So I mean, I'm not going to give solutions rather than just say delivering that cultural change becomes ever more complex when you have that broader risk package that you're carrying.
Brilliant. So I guess in terms of providing kind of examples or more concrete advice for our attendees, I don't know if one of you in particular would like to pick this up, but what have you found is one of the best tactics in terms of engaging with your audiences and getting buy-in to security culture? And maybe what is something you found actually has caused quite a bit of resistance in terms of that message?
So I can take some stuff that's worked really well. I mean, I kind of touched on the phishing area. We do a lot of self-assessment, and we've been involved in some industry testing over the last couple of years, and I think probably most people have recognised that is an area that we are targeted the most. So we've done a lot of work on our ethical phishing campaigns to make sure that we raise that awareness, and quite simply the way we do that is targeted emails. Those people that then click on the wrong links, they're then sent on awareness training, they're taken through further training, and then they'll be in the next pilot. In that second pilot, if you click on it again, having had the training, you clearly start to have a problem there, and we then look at further training and then conversations with the line manager, and that type of element which then goes down a path, and that's been hugely successful. But equally, it's about making it, once you've raised that awareness, it's about introducing processes that make it easy for people to understand it. So really simple things like just having a button they can press if they forward a suspicious email to a certain area, and just making people understand it. And I think the other thing we've learned is that it's not something you can do in a sort of cyber awareness week once a year. It's something that you have to continue to do to embed as a culture, and so people understand it a lot better.
Perhaps if I could just bring a bit
Sure.
from the Australian context in that regard. A lot of people today have spoken about leadership and the importance of leadership, top level leaders talking about this issue and being comfortable with it. And certainly something that's shifted in Australia, and you've seen the shift in big industry talking about the issue and being more comfortable with it, is having a Prime Minister who will actually go out on a limb and talk about the issue. And one of the things that's happened recently is having someone like Malcolm Turnbull, who some of you may or may not know, and his past in the software industry and ISPs in Australia, really talking at a technical level as well as that policy level, has made a step change. And he made an admission during the launch of the cyber strategy, which is around admitting that the government had had an incident take place around the Bureau of Meteorology, and that was a first for Australia. That had never happened before, but that sets the tone in a way that assists others in absorbing, I think, behavioural change and realising it's acceptable to say we've got a problem. You know, I'm an alcoholic. It's that sort of thing. You know, you first of all have to admit it, and then you can move on from that position. And I remember talking post-incident with some of the guys who were dealing with the cleanup of that particular incident, and they said, well, actually, we're rather philosophical about this, because actually what it's led to are a whole range of new departments who didn't even know what cybersecurity meant, let alone training their staff in it, have suddenly rung us and said, right, what do we need to do? And what kind of cultural shifts do we need to make to actually be up to par now that we've been affected by serious incidents? So that's the negative, if you like, the beating around the head with a stick rather than the promotion of good behaviour. But I think those two things combined can also have quite a big impact, and they certainly have done in the Australian context.
And just picking up on it, if I may, so one of the things that we work with in terms of, again, typing a national culture is looking at preferred learning styles and then preferred leadership styles. And so a lot of times it's as simple as, again, getting the right leadership style, delivering the right message in the right context. And those are often very simple tweaks that you can make in your awareness content, as opposed to having to make policy changes or do something that's dramatically different that you're trying to accomplish with governance across your global organization. But yeah, it's just very interesting, because again, those are two of the things that we key in on. What's the preferred learning style? How can we flex our awareness content so that actually that preferred learning style is being catered for? What's the preferred leadership style? How do we actually alter who's delivering the messaging so that preferred leadership style is actually catered for as well? And again, you'll see a dramatic improvements in terms of how those messages are received and then ultimately learned and you know, welcomed again for the next round of education.
Okay. So I guess we probably have a balanced strike here then between sort of impressing upon everyone within the organization that although the board is accountable for cybersecurity, that it is the responsibility of everyone in the organization actually for cybersecurity. But I think it also can be quite scary in terms of they may not necessarily know what to do and may not necessarily know how to react. Is there anything you've specifically done in your organization to help educate users about actually how they need to react when these types of incidents do occur?
I've done that at the international level. So I've run simulations with various different governments in the Asia Pacific with their CERT teams and other various parts of their government mechanics to run large-scale cyber instances with them. And you have to take them away. It's often at official dialogues, and you take them away from behind, you know, their flagpole and their traditional political positions, and try and create a safe environment where they can actually feel like they can discuss some of the issues they have internally, and also when incidences begin to escalate into an international incident. And that seems to work quite well in just getting a slightly different tone to the conversation than you would otherwise have. And certainly you've seen this plethora of desktops and multimedia simulations now fall out from that. But it's creating an environment where it's both interesting, engaging, and not frightening to actually talk about the issues and air a few problems that you may have. And that in of itself, I think, is a cultural change and fascinating, you know, dynamics to carry out when you're in a, you know, diverse region like the Asia Pacific.
Okay.
I would say it's a slightly different problem at RBS in that in the recent corporate memory we've been through some relatively big incidents that have not been cyber related, and so that was kind of front and center in everyone's mind. So actually it was a little bit about you know, just sort of aligning, you know, security risk, as it were, and said, you know, we had this big incident in 2012, and as an example, you know, if you don't get this bit right, you know, then we could face similar issues as a part of education piece. And once you tie that into people's heads and they understand why they're doing something and what they're doing by sort of changing behaviours, then I mean, I think that helps just keying it to that to the incidents that we've had in the past. I mean, the other point I'd say is that, you know, we've touched on kind of the the approach for educating the sort of everybody in the organisation. Clearly, there's also an element in terms of a process for your more technical people, and certainly something that we've brought in over the last few years is an operational readiness passport that every change has to go through in the bank to make sure that it is secure. So, in the past, I'm sure everyone's been very focused on the sort of IT resilience side and things like that, but there's a very robust process that needs to happen so that every change that goes through is secure all the way through until it kind of goes live. Whereas certainly in the past, some time ago, the security element was on occasion towards the end of the process as opposed to right at the beginning. So that's more in the sort of technical element, but making sure that process is embedded from the start is really important as well.
Right. And I guess we've heard quite a bit of discussion today about the need for a common language, about actually translating cybersecurity needs and requirements into language that can be understood by everyone. Do you have any examples of campaigns run within your own organization that have kind of helped translate this into something for a broader audience?
I think one of the things that we've tried to do, I think, is so not only just understanding, because I think there's always the danger of techno jargon getting involved, and I think people are basically aware that they need to try to minimize that. But I also think there's this issue of, again, the messaging around cybersecurity having been almost like a public service announcement for the last 10 years. This is coming, this is happening, this is going to be terrible, you're not paying attention to it. And so there's this incredibly sort of negative, repetitive messaging that goes out in cybersecurity awareness sessions. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is shift that to just talking about winning. And when you think about people, particularly executives, they've spent a lot of time in their careers looking at risk and looking at people or situations that maybe didn't believe that they could succeed under the circumstances, and saying, you know what, I'm going to do this anyway. And so shifting the messaging around from, listen, we're gonna tell you all the different ways that you could lose, we're going to tell you all the different ways that you could get damaged, and then we're going to try to help you not do that, and just shift that to a positive message, which is, look, the environment's complicated. How can we actually help you win? How can we actually help you get your objectives across? But being very, very disciplined about that message, because it's a little bit hard when you're faced with just a ton of risk and a ton of potential negative consequences. But being very conscious about that language, in our experience, has actually just woken the room up in terms of being receptive to next steps, budget considerations, etc.
Brilliant. I guess at this point, do we have any questions from the audience? Sorry. Yes, I believe there's a gentleman over here.
Hi, Rob Shilson from the Financial Times. You were talking about there about wins. I wonder if there's other sort of carrots that people have offered rather than that stick that's just sort of proverbially beating people up when they make mistakes. How have you tried to motivate across the wider employee base to help them behave better?
I think a lot, I think a lot of it for us is about accepting the new normal, and I think actually the media's helped a lot in terms of just broadcasting out. That the last conversation talked a little bit about people getting a little bit numb to the fact that a cyber breach has happened, and actually in some ways there's a good aspect to that as well, right? Yeah, it's sort of becoming the new normal, but in that context, everybody's over sort of the hysteria about it. And it sets a different sort of psychological playing field for you then to build on it, which is like, okay, if everybody's in the same boat, and it's not that Target or RBS or somebody else has actually done something wrong, we're all in the same boat, then you can start to, from that perspective of sort of equality, look at, all right, well, let's start to build a narrative about how we can win. How can we be better than those guys over there? How can we actually gain a competitive advantage by being resilient against cyber attack? And that message has been out there. I think what's different now is the environment is such that actually I think people are starting to hear it. So I think it's about, again, not succumbing to your own tendency to be negative about it, and actually try to see if you can exploit that slightly positive message about competitive advantage in a difficult environment.
Right. I guess any other questions for now, or so?
So far you've talked about sort of mitigating current systems, current behaviours in the new paradigm. But I just wondered how much an appreciation of behaviours is becoming a factor as you look to expand your business model or take it into another country or another region. I mean, is that started right at the get-go of a business model, business plan? Is it inculcated at that level as opposed to we've now got a country, we've now got a region, and now we need to make it compliant or make it assured?
For us, it's actually part of our business model. We pride ourselves on commitment to local content and commitment to that local way of doing things. And we see that as part of our competitive advantage. So what we don't want to do is say, right, here's the one way to do it, and we're going to come in and we're going to work in your country with your natural resources and do it our way. We're very interested in trying to make sure that we're doing that with the local constituents, that we're doing it with our local partners in country, and that we're creating that new way of working. But that's not just in sort of the cyber realm. That's sort of in the DNA of the company. So for us, that's part of our blueprint.
Brilliant. I guess any other questions for now, or? So I guess, there's been quite a bit of talk throughout the day about one of the challenges of cybersecurity is that the attack vectors are constantly changing. We're trying to cope with new technologies. In terms of educating our users, educating our customers, speaking with our suppliers, how much of this is going to be static in terms of the messaging, and how much of it needs to be refreshed?
I think you have a baseline of awareness that you do with our customers and with our staff, which is these are the kind of cardinal rules. Don't give away this information. You may be targeted in this way. But then again, we use intelligence and threat to identify certain areas of the market that may be targeted at certain times of the year. So we've had that with some farmers who get targeted just after they've received their subsidies. So I think you use the intelligence to then pick your timing to go out to them to make them aware of this particular threat. And again, where you have a particular MO, such as there's been CEO level fraud, which is where you get an email supposedly from your CEO to act upon that. Again, you target it to the right companies at the right level, so that your education is hitting them at the time that they're about to be most vulnerable. Yeah. But again, I think you've got to keep it pretty simple. Back to what was being said earlier, there's a wave of information out there. It's about this is the threat, or could be happening to you, and these are the things that you need to do or not to do. Keep it pretty simple.
One of the exciting things in the region that I'm based is just the sheer kind of growth levels that it's going through, and currently there are about 1.3 billion online users out of a population of 3.9 billion. So the potential for growth is huge. But what that also brings is just an enormous number of first-time users who are connecting online, and majority of whom are doing it through mobile handsets. And that is a key area of vulnerability, is that for a first-time user, they're often the ones who potentially have the least knowledge in terms of that connection. So a lot of the education, I think, that should go on in the region that I'm sat is at that very basic level, is when you first connect, what are the kinds of precautions you should be taking? Because certainly it's been described as akin to the Wild West in that particular region, and cyber criminals are incredibly active in that part of the world, and that brings into the point of view that there's an awful lot of Eastern European crime gangs who are physically moving to certain parts of Southeast Asia because of the legislative frameworks just aren't there and available to be able to prosecute them. So it gives them a permissive environment, not only in terms of delivering their payloads, but also they have a very easy target hit list of people who aren't actually incredibly well educated in that first time use experience. So that area of knowledge certainly, and training and development certainly needs to come on at a huge pace.
Brilliant. So I guess we probably have time for one or two more questions, if we have any at the moment. So I guess as takeaways for for our audience, what is one thing you would advise them to do that would most positively impact, and what maybe is something you would caution to avoid in terms of running awareness campaigns?
Just purely awareness campaigns, or?
Maybe awareness campaigns is a tool for embedding cybersecurity culture, but I think maybe if it's something else related to leveraging people as part of our cyber defense, that would be fine as well.
I think, the key is to understand why you're doing something, so that whoever you're targeting understands where they fit into the bigger picture. And I think then you need to, as I touched on before, you need to make processes, the so what. So we're doing this is how you need to react. If you don't react in this way, this could happen. If you react in this way, this could happen. And the way you want them to react, that needs to be easy for them to do. Make the process as simple as possible.
And I think then on top of that, I think there needs to be an acceptance that the value systems that are governing your creation of a policy or governance, that intrinsic sense of right and wrong is actually culturally driven, and your culture may be very different in terms of what those intrinsic sense of right and wrong are, or senses of right and wrong are, if you've got, again, a multinational scenario in terms of your operations, and you have to begin to respect that, number one, and number two, appreciate the depth that's going to have in terms of influencing individuals' behavior and reaction to that governance. It's critical.
I'd personally say that if you're going to create behavioural change, make sure it's a program which engages people in a positive manner, and it's not just about slapping them around the face when they get things wrong. I certainly engage with if I feel it's it's presented in the right way and makes me want to change my behaviours for the right reasons. As soon as the stick is applied, I tend to react exactly the opposite way. So it sounds a very glib thing to say, but I think it's incredibly important.
And that's true across all cultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good note to end on. I guess, for me, probably the key learning points from this would be that messaging is really, really important. Keep it positive. Make sure it's relevant and timely where necessary. Keep it simple and very easy to understand. And probably most importantly, one size doesn't fit all. Culture actually has a really big impact on how you need to be framing and messaging. So brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.